Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Dear students, hope you'll be doing well and fine during this quarantine. Dear students, you are welcome in another lecture of non-fiction prose. The title of this lecture is The Subjection of Women by John Stuart Mill. In earlier lecture of the subjection of women, you people are gone through with the analysis, summary, key takeaways and writing style of this essay. In this lecture, we will discuss the background of this essay along with character list, major glossary, important themes, important quotations, overall analysis in a nutshell, rhetorical devices like symbols, allegory and motifs, metaphors and similes. We will see the use of irony, the use of imagery and important questions that are raised by author in this essay. So let's start with the background of this essay. When we talk about the background of this essay, we see that John Stuart Mill wrote the revolutionary essay, The Subjection of Women, with notes that it was strongly influenced by his wife, Harriet Taylor Mill. Modern scholars have questioned the legacy that husband constructed for wife, in which he has been accused of making exorbitant claims about her intelligence and influence. Despite the revisionist approach, however, the subjection of women strongly resembles in both content and character as well an essay titled The Enfranchisement of Women, which was published by Harriet, his wife, in 1851. In that essay, which was wrote by the wife of John Stuart Mill, his wife argued in favor of a utilitarian approach to equality, which asserted the presence of hostility toward women, kept them subjugated at all levels of society. The Subjection of Women was published in 1869, while The Enfranchisement of Women was published in 1851. So the subjection of women is notable for situating John Stuart Mill at the forefront of the developing notion of a feminist movement, not exactly called that, those who were daring enough to suggest that women could be the intellectual equal of men were viewed as profoundly radical in their thinking, in their way of looking, in their outlook at best, and dangerously delusional at worst. So over the course of 4 chapters, Mill carefully delineates his argument for an innate equality that existing between the two sexes, and then goes on to suggest that this innate equality is being stifled by denial of access to education. Mill also calls on reform to change existing social structures, overlying as all this fundamental appeal to the simple morality of the issue. Indeed, Mill makes an caustic appeal to intellectual evil of the immorality of subjugating women as second-class citizens due to the prejudicial limitations of the birth and birth alone. So, it is within the realm of morality that Mill's essay attains level of truly revolutionary literature, while raising irrefutable scientific points. The appeal cuts most deeply in his assertion that subjection of women is a systematic choice which is based on scientific ignorance and but also willful disregard of empirical evidence. So this is the background of this essay, that why John Stuart Mill wrote this essay on the subjection of women. So Mill's argument about the innate equality and his subjection of women, the subjection of women is a systematic choice and that is based on the scientific ignorance. So this is the background of this essay. Now we will discuss the central ideas which are inculcated in this essay, the subjection of women by Mill. So let's see. Here he puts some assumptions. Which assumptions? We will see the assumptions. When we see the essay, we see that Mill begins by addressing the assumption that women are the inferior sex, lesser than man, and being less intelligent and less skilled. Why they are less skilled? He says that by nature. So he says that this assumption or all these assumptions that women are inferior, they are less intellectual, they are less skilled, has no supporting evidence, because men have never allowed women to have a fair shot and try things to see how good they really are. Therefore, he concludes the sexism is a conclusion drawn by spurious logic. He continues by arguing that women will be able to do by their nature whatever nature intended for them to be able to do, and therefore it would be illogical to assume that women need to be protected from trying things, from doing things, since failure is a built-in response to the lack of capacity. In other words, nature will limit women to whatever extent it does limit women, and men don't need to be involved in that process at all. Mill then offers a threefold utilitarian response. Utilitarian response in which sense? That to the problem of the sexism, he says that by allowing women to participate in trade, there can be the free trade of the commodities that women would like to introduce. He also argues that by educating women, we expedite the progress of men by introducing more chance for breakthrough and learning. He also includes here a defense of the home life of women, saying that although men would like to assume that they would dislike their wives if they were equals, they would actually probably like them a lot more, because by allowing them wives to be real people, and their friendship can begin with women as intellectual equals. Finally, he attacks marriage laws for placing restrictions on wives to submit them to a type of slavery. He mentions the problem of the vote and notices that since women constitute half the population, that the removal of their political opinions was both tyrannical and against the ideas of democracy. He ends the book with an exploration of a few of his favorite powerful women like Elizabeth I, Victoria, and even Joan of Arc. So now we will see the character list of the subjection of women. In this essay, he presented some characters which are male sex, Aristotle, slave owners, queen, Englishmen, and we will see them one by one. Let's start with male sex. J.S. Mill expounds how the male sex relishes unjust power relative to the female sex, which occasions the omnipresent gender inequity, and the unjust power that the male sex revels in is viewed as regular. The second character is Aristotle. J.S. Mill cites Aristotle's opinion vis-a-vis the dominion of men over women is usually based, namely that there are different natures among mankind, free natures and slave natures. The citation is central to building Mill's thesis concerning the resemblance between slavery and gender disparity. The third one is slave owners. While slave owners underwrote the notion of racial disparity be dominating the blacks and calculatedly yoking them, they considered the enslavement of blacks a regular edict of existence. The fourth one is queen. The queen exemplifies utter feminine potency, and here Mill states that nothing so much astonishes the people of distant parts of the world when they first learn anything about England as to be told that it is under a queen. The thing seems to them so unnatural as to be almost incredible, and the queen's authoritative rank astonishes people, considering most cultures consider men to be the grander beings who should command regimes such as the monarchy. And the last one is Englishmen. The Englishmen do not adhere to gender egalitarianism. To Englishmen, this does not seem in the least degree unnatural, the queen's power, because they are used to it, but they do feel it unnatural that women should be soldiers or members of parliament. Englishmen do not regard women highly, hence they do not comment of the women's immersion in political dealings and warfare. So these were some characters which I have incorporated for you. Now we will see the major glossary of the subjection of women. We will see them one by one. I have tried to exclude some major glossary, some major words which are a little bit difficult to understand. So for your ease, I have tried to make them easy. The first one is adherent. Adherent means being devoted to doing a particular task. The second one is litigant. Litigant means plaintiff or the accuser, the one who accused someone. The third one is partiality. Partiality means biasness, the one-sidedness. The next one is infallible. Infallible means perfect or foolproof, means flawless. The next one is concession. Concession means an allowance for something or relief. The next one is cynical. This word used in negative sense, saying something mockingly, saying something in a fun style, in a negative sense. The next one is tyrant. Tyrant means oppressor, the one who commits tyranny. The next one is loath. Loath means disliking or despising someone. The next one is tyranny. Tyranny means cruelty, unjust, oppression. The next one is propensity. Propensity means having a tendency of doing something. The next one is malefactor. Malefactor means a person who is mischief maker. Next one is forbearance. Forbearance means self-control, the control over your deeds, over your personality. So this is related to self-control. The next one is abysses. Abysses means voids or emptiness, hollowness. The next one is ferocious. Ferocious. It means being violent, being aggressive. The next one is indulgence. Indulgence means in excess. The next one is radical. Radical means in essential action. The next one is conspicuous. Conspicuous means something obvious, something which is very clear. The next one is eminently. Eminently means extremely. Next one is monstrous. Monstrous means something horrible, something dreadful. The next one is frivolous. Frivolous means light-hearted. And the last one is exertion. Exertion means effort. So these were the some major glossary, some major words which are incorporated by J.S. Mill in his essay, The Subjection of the Women. Now we will see the major themes. There are four major themes. The first one is man use spurious logic to maintain sexist views. Empowering women is improving the community itself. Wives should be viewed as friends, not as property, and women should be allowed to vote. And we will now see them as one by one. So let's start with men use spurious logic to maintain sexist views. By saying that women are inferior and then protecting women by insulating them from experience, men are establishing a straw man argument. They are saying, look how bad women are, without ever having given them the chance to seriously try at things to see if they really are bad or not. So it's an argument from silence. And Mill challenge men to be scientific about their assumptions, to provide evidence, and to not assume something until it has been proven with evidence. Therefore, women should be free to try anything, and if they are naturally inferior, nature itself will restrain them. And the next one is empowering women is improving the community itself. By allowing women to participate in trade and education and politics, people gain the expertise of an entire population, half the population in fact. So thereby doubling their odds of discovering a cure, for example, or for solving a particularly difficult problem. The third theme is wives should be viewed as friends, not as property. Mill anticipates a response in his commentary about women being educated. The concern is this: if women are educated, will they be unbearable? But Mill observes that originally what a man hopes for in a marriage is companionship, and by allowing one's wife to be an educated, involved citizen, he can deepen their relationship. This just underscores Mill's first assumption that sexism is essentially hatred. And the last one is women should be allowed to vote. Mill understood that women's points of view were equally important and equally valid to men's opinions. But because of voting laws, women were not able to express these opinions in a politically meaningful way. Therefore, he felt that women should be given their basic right for voting. So these were some major themes. Now we will see some major quotes which are used by J.S. Mill in this essay. As you know, this essay is very important, very significant, and the quotations of this essay are also very significant. So let's start with the first quotation. Women have, however, some share of influence in giving the tone to public moralities, since their sphere of actions has been a little widened and since a considerable number of them have occupied themselves practically in the promotion of objects reaching beyond their own family and household. The influence of women counts for a great deal in two of the most marked features of modern European life: its aversion to war and its addiction to philanthropy. So this it was a quotation by J.S. Mill. Now I will try to explain this quotation for you. In this quotation, Mill tried to convince us through that women's input to the societal welfare cannot be minimalist, for they have the potential to auspiciously transmute the society as long as their voices are accorded opportunity for manifestation, and women countersign harmony by dissenting combats between various countries. Besides, the women's partaking in philanthropic ventures has been contributory in relieving the European ethos. So this was the gist of this quotation. Now we will see the second quotation. The second quotation starts with, "As for charity, it is a matter in which the immediate effect on the persons directly concerned and the ultimate consequence to the general good are opt to be at complete war with one another, while the education given to women, an education of the sentiments rather than of the understanding and the habit inculcated by their whole life of looking to immediate effects on persons and not to remote effects on classes of persons, make them both unable to see and unwilling to admit the ultimate evil tendency of any form of charity or philanthropy which commends itself to their sympathetic feelings." So this was the second quotation, and now I will try to explain it. Women's engrossment is charity, and it is a superlative engagement which advances the lives of the recipients of the charity. They portray sentimentalities that are valuable in plummeting hostility, which is dominant during war. Through charity, the women accentuate the work of aiding others, which is the personification of decency and altruism. So this is the gist of this second quotation. Now we will see the third, which is lengthy in its volume. He starts, less than 40 years ago, Englishmen might still by law hold human beings in bondage as saleable property. Within the present century, they might kidnap them and carry them off and work them literally to death. This absolutely extreme case of the law of force, condemned by those who can tolerate almost every other form of arbitrary power, and which of all others presents features the most revolting to the feelings of all who look at it from an impartial position, was the law of civilized and Christian England within the memory of persons now living, and in one half of Anglo-Saxon America 3 or 4 years ago, not only did slavery exist, but the slave trade and the breeding of slaves expressly for it was a general practice between slave states. Yet not only was there a greater strength of sentiment against it, but in England at least a less amount either of feeling or of interest in favor of it than of any other of the customary abuses of force, for its motive was the love of gain, unmixed and undisguised, and those who profited by it were a very small numerical fraction of the country, while the natural feeling of all who were not personally interested in it was unmitigated abhorrence. So extreme an instance makes it almost superfluous to refer to any other, but consider the long duration of absolute monarchy. So this was it was a third one quotation which was very important, and now we will see the explanation of this quotation. In this quotation, Mill's allusion to slavery proves the magnitude of the Englishman. Subsidization of the notion purpose the inequity of human beings. Their socialization of force indicates that Englishmen would go to the extreme extent as long as it would affirm their professed power over the other races. Although England portrayed the persona of a civilized nation with the inherent prerogative to colonize other lands and evangelize Christianity, their blatant commendation of slavery is an embodiment of uncivilization. The permanency of unqualified monarchy government in England proclaims disparity, since the members of the monarchy are reckoned to be superior. Accordingly, inequity is an omnipresent exhibition in countless scopes of existence. So these quotations were most important in this essay, in the subjection of the women. and I have tried to put a small analysis of these quotations for you. So these were the major some major glossary, some major words which are incorporated by J.S. Mill in his essay The Subjection of the Women. Now we will see the major themes. There are four major themes. The first one is man use spurious logic to maintain sexist views. Empowering women is improving the community itself. Wives should be viewed as friends, not as property, and women should be allowed to vote. And we will now see them as one by one. So let's start with men use spurious logic to maintain sexiest views. By saying that women are inferior and then protecting women by insulating them from experience, men are establishing a straw man argument. They are saying, look how bad women are, without ever having given them the chance to seriously try at things to see if they really are bad or not. So it's an argument from silence. And Mill challenge men to be scientific about their assumptions, to provide evidence, and to not assume something until it has been proven with evidence. Therefore, women should be free to try anything, and if they are naturally inferior, nature itself will restrain them. And the next one is empowering women is improving the community itself. By allowing women to participate in trade and education and politics, people gain the expertise of an entire population, half the population in fact. So thereby doubling their odds of discovering a cure, for example, or for solving a particularly difficult problem. The third theme is wives should be viewed as friends, not as property. Mill anticipates a response in his commentary about women being educated. The concern is this: if women are educated, will they be unbearable? But Mill observes that originally what a man hopes for in a marriage is companionship, and by allowing one's wife to be an educated, involved citizen, he can deepen their relationship. This just underscores Mill's first assumption that sexism is essentially hatred. And the last one is women should be allowed. Now we will see the rhetorical devices which are used in this essay, The Subjection of the Women, like symbols, like allegory, like motifs. So first of all, we see the chivalrous ideal. Chivalrous ideal, when we talk about the chivalrous ideal, we see that women overtly countersign chivalrous principles among men. Mill explicates both through the contagion of sympathy and through the desire of men to shine in the eyes of women. Their feelings have great effect in keeping alive what remains of the chivalrous ideal. In fostering the sentiments and continuing the tradition of spirit and generosity in these points of character, their standard is higher than that of men. In the quality of justice, somewhat lower. The chivalrous ideal is emblematical of dignity, which portrays a man as an honorable nobleman. Women are influential in swaying men to behave in a moral and alluring mode. The second thing is martyrdom. Mill observes employs the figurative martyrdom to portray the perverse canons women are anticipated to submit to. Society makes the whole life of a woman. In the easy classes, a continued self-sacrifice, it exacts from her an unremitting restraint of the whole of her natural inclinations, and the sole return it makes to her for what often deserves the name of a martyrdom is consideration. And her consideration is inseparably connected with that of her husband. After paying the full price for it, she finds that she is to lose it for no reason of which she can feel the cogency. The demands that humanity enforces on women folk are analogues to those of martyrdom, for the society expects a woman to detriment her securities, but it does not oblige males to ransom their pensions. So these are the symbols and allegory and motifs which are used in this essay. Now we will say some more rhetorical devices like metaphors and similes in this essay. So number one is slavery, number two is choice, and number third is on liberty. On liberty is another essay of G.S. Mill. We will see the resemblance of both essays. The next one is saying what one expects, and the last one is metaphorical, literal, or both. So for your ease, I have made points, and now we will see the explanation or analysis of these points. So let's start with slavery. Mill, a man writing about women at a time when women has essentially no rights, is to be given credit for metaphorically insisting that the only slavery left in England at the time was that of wives. Unfortunately, within the construct of a completely different simile, one might well question the validity of Mill's fundamental understanding of slavery itself. Hardly any slave except one immediately attached to the master's person. This line is quoted by G.S. Mill. That hardly any slave except one immediately attached to the master's person is a slave at all hours and all manners. In general, he has, like a soldier, his fixed task, and when it is done or when he is off duty, he disposes within certain limits of his own time and has a family life into which the master rarely intrudes. So next one is choice. The ban of women then and now has been that man has often been the arbiter of deciding what their choices in life will be. Again, Mill is certainly to be congratulated for expressing an overall progressive conceptualization of subjugating of women, but when one delves into the specific things get murky. For instance, this metaphorical comparison of housewifery as a career choice. The third one is on liberty. Arguably, Mill's most famous work is the essay on liberty. This particularly essay is fairly long, and the word liberty only appears about 10 times. 5 of those appearances are in just one paragraph. However, and in that paragraph, Mill metaphorically but quite strongly suggests that by enjoying the liberty extended to them to beautify themselves, women have been standing in the way of their own ascendance. Seeing what one expects. Mill creates a metaphorical link between the passage of a person on a journey and the passage of history as a journey of time. This metaphor is intended to reveal that in both cases that facts and reality will almost always be subservient to perception. One sees what one expects, hopes, or just plain wants to see because. And the last one is metaphorical, literal, or both. Let's return to the beginning of this section on Mill's use of metaphor. After spending the first 3 chapters expounding at great length upon the institution of marriage, it is the opening paragraphs of chapter 4 that Mill finally arrives at his point. The question here, however, is one of the complexity in his assertion here meant to be taken metaphorically or literally. Another possibility is that it is meant to be both, perhaps one to group believing a certain way and the other to those believing the opposite. This possibility also raises an interesting question: can something be both metaphorical and literal to the same person? So these were some rhetorical devices which were used by J.S. Mill in the form of metaphors and similes. Now we will see irony, how irony is used or incorporated in the subjection of women, or how J.S. Mill used irony to elaborate his ideas towards the subjection of women. Number 1, the irony of gender. Although gender is signaling physically that there are differences between men and women, there literally are biological and medical differences between the two. That doesn't mean anything more than it means. It is ironic that people have so commonly and ubiquitously assumed that just because women are smaller, they are also incompetent. Are we really sexist just because women have been historically smaller? Mill says yes, this is obvious and it is wrong. Number 2, the irony of disenfranchisement. Ironically, the injustice of society involved disenfranchisement from power. So it takes sacrificial people in power who will do the unpopular thing of sacrificing their rapport in the broken system to re-enfranchise those who have been disallowed to represent their point of view. So in this case, Mill notices that women never have been perfectly enfranchised in his society, not since the dawn of man. The next one is the absolute obviousness of the problem. The problem is obviously that men chronically disallow women to be successful, and then they hide behind the reserves as if the failure of a woman to become powerful against the assumption of the man in her life is evidence that they were right to prevent her from growing. Obviously, this is a problem, and this is the crux of subjection. The fourth one is the ironic obviousness of the solution. Obviously, if the problem is that women are not encouraged to grow, thrive, and try and fail, they cannot become powerful. Since men have to be encouraged to grow and thrive, and since they must try and fail, Learning from their mistakes, ironically, these problems are emotionally rooted in stubborn attitudes. It isn't that they are necessarily complicated problems. Mill says the answer is obviously to support all people equally, both men and women. And the last one is feminism as a painfully ironic endeavor. Therefore, the most crucial irony of the book is that it is painfully ironic uh, to have these conversations in the first place, whether a person identifies as a feminist per se or not. It is ironic to argue that women are less than men while literally manufacturing a system that would prove that assumption correct. As Mill notes, if no one imposes rules at all, natural law will govern women. Men need not involve themselves whatsoever. If a woman cannot do something, then it will be obvious to prevent her from trying is painfully counterintuitive. So, this was the use of irony, and we saw under 5 headings. The next one is tyranny. Tyranny means cruelty, unjust, oppression. The next one is propensity. Propensity means having a tendency of doing something. The next one is malefactor. Malefactor means a person who is mischief maker. Next one is forbearance. Forbearance means self-control, the control over your deeds, over your personality. So this is related to self-control. The next one is abysses. Abysses means voids or emptiness, hollowness. The next one is ferocious. You're ferocious. It means being violent, being aggressive. The next one is indulgence. Indulgence means in excess. The next one is radical. Radical means in essential action. So these were the major some major glossary, some major words which are incorporated by J.S. Mill in his essay, The Subjection of the Women. Now we will see the major themes. There are four major themes. The first one is man use spurious logic to maintain sexist views. Empowering women is improving the community itself. Wives should be viewed as friends, not as property, and women should be allowed to vote. And we will now see them as one by one. So let's start with men use spurious logic to maintain sexiest views. Some major quotes which are used by J.S. Mill in this essay. As you know, this essay